In tonight's stories, two haunting legacies unfold. A boy's childhood drawings become the seed of madness as his grieving father descends into obsession, violence, and horror tied to a fridge full of art. And an old man recalls the day he met a stranger on a lonely road, a smiling figure who walked the power lines and asked only for a name. Two tales of memory and madness, where the past refuses to die. Welcome to Nightmare Proof, where true horror comes alive. Here, you'll hear real stories of the strange, the disturbing, and the unexplainable. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to face the darkness. 1. Mom used to hang my art on the fridge. When I was a kid, Mom would hang my drawings on the fridge. When I was teen, Dad would hang my drawings on the fridge, and on the walls, and on the ceiling, and on the windows. One of my first core memories was of my mom excitedly putting one of my drawings from school on the fridge. It was one of those typical stickman family drawings that all kids do at some point. Yet despite the mundanity of it, she was ecstatic. If her goal was to give me some sort of confidence, I guess it worked, because I spent the next 12 years drawing almost every day. Every year in art class, the teachers would normally have 2 or 3 projects where they would get you to make something for your parents as a gift. Dad was gone most nights, meaning I never got to spend quality time with him, so most, if not all, of my projects were made specifically for my mom. I'm not kidding when I say she would put anything I gave her on the fridge. By the time I was 10, there was so many it got to the point we ended up running out of space and couldn't find strong enough magnets to keep all the papers from falling off. Wanna guess what my mom's solution to this was? That's right, buy another fridge. The new fridge went in the garage and held all of my older drawings, since she wanted to keep my newer stuff on display in the kitchen for everyone to see. I remember being confused about why we needed 2 refrigerators when we could put the old stuff in a box or a drawer. But my dad liked the idea, so I never thought much more of it. Little did I know at the time, he was only okay with it because it meant he had more room to store his beer and hide snacks he didn't want me eating on him. He told me I was banned from using the garage fridge until I turned 19, half joking that it was so I could be old enough to replace any beer that I'd inevitably drink without his permission. My dad didn't teach me much, but when he did, it stuck. I followed that rule like it was gospel. Whenever I had friends try to convince me to take a couple of his dozens of bottles and cans, I always refused. Even if he wasn't around much, I loved my dad and always listened to what he said. He rarely yelled and never hit me, but there was still a threatening aura around him whenever he was upset, and no one, including my mom, would argue with him. Mom always said that Dad knew best, and he usually did. Life was a breeze if you did exactly as Dad requested. His sports were the only thing that I'd witness him get truly angry over. When I was 12, we ended up moving to a new neighborhood after my dad got into a heated argument with our elderly neighbor beside us. Later that night, I was woken up by my mom to a loud commotion and flashing lights peeking in through my curtains. She got me dressed and brought me downstairs where we sat watching late-night cartoons until my dad came back inside. He told my mom that the old man he was arguing with earlier had died from a heart attack. My mom drove me to my grandparents for the night, while my dad stayed behind at the house. That single night turned into a week of no school, while my parents found a new place for us to live. They wouldn't tell me why we had to move, but part of me knew it was because of our neighbor. When we got to the new house, I was allowed to pick my own room, so obviously I chose the biggest bedroom with no confrontation from my parents. In hindsight, I knew it was because they had started sleeping in separate rooms. This didn't concern me at the time, because they still kissed each other. They still hugged and professed their love for each other every day. I never saw them argue about anything other than what they wanted to get for dinner on the weekends. Eventually, I got used to it and just thought it was a normal thing all adults do as they get older. I had to change schools when we moved, so I was all alone with no friends in a new place. I didn't take the change well, so my mom made sure to give me extra attention whenever I got home from school. She never said it outright, but I knew she knew. Things started to get a bit better after I met this cute girl in my grade. I can't seem to remember her name, but I do remember having the biggest crush on her for a while, but I was too shy to talk to her. One day, when we were picking partners for a group assignment, she came up to me on her own accord to ask if I wanted to be her partner. Of course I said yes. She was my first and only friend in this new place. Our parents became quick friends too, bringing us to each other's houses on weekends to have barbecues or just to visit. We would run along the creek in the woods behind my house, playing Pirate and the Princess, pretending the creek was of the sea, and that the ground on either side were opposing island kingdoms. She always wanted to play outside, especially by the creek or anywhere with water. During the summer, we went to the beach a lot, where we'd swim until the sun went down, eating campfire hot dogs and marshmallows. In the winter, she taught me to skate, and the best places to go sledding after a fresh snowfall. I had never been happier, and soon enough, I had forgotten about all my worries. When I was 14, my mom was diagnosed with a degenerative disease. She couldn't work anymore, meaning I wouldn't see my dad awake very long, for days at a time. Most nights when he came home, he would help get mom settled in bed after giving her a bath, then go straight to bed himself. He ended up moving his mattress into her room, right next to her bed. He never wanted to be too far from her. Occasionally, Dad would get sent home early from work, so Mom and I got to spend more time with him on those days, even though I could tell he would rather be in bed. On one of those rare nights, Mom had to keep nudging Dad awake on our first trip back to the movie theaters since her diagnosis. Dad and I would spend all of our free time with Mom, especially since she needed help with almost everything nowadays, which also meant I couldn't hang out with my only best friend anymore. When our parents did meet up, it never lasted very long. Mom's social battery depleted a lot faster on those days, not even able to keep her signature smile on for more than a couple of hours before she needed to rest. Despite the circumstances, Mom still put all the art I made for her on the fridge. I started drawing a lot more after her diagnosis. In fact, I drew so much so that we completely covered the deep freezer, Dad's garage fridge, Mom's bedroom mini fridge, and the kitchen fridge with my art. I suggested framing the ones she liked the most and hanging them up around the house, but she just laughed, saying that every inch of the walls would be covered in my art if we did that. She didn't want people thinking she went crazy already. The day I turned 16 was the last time my friend came to visit with her parents. We decided to take the trail in my backyard to the creek we used to call the Seven Seas. During the walk, she introduced me to my first joint, and we got stoned by the water. She made laugh harder than I've laughed in a long time, and life almost felt normal again. When the sun disappeared behind the trees, I gave her my jacket as a cool autumn breeze brought us closer together. She laid her head on my shoulder, and when I turned to ask her a dumb question like, "Why do leaves fall?" she shut me up with a kiss. Our foreheads touched, nose to nose, and we giggled incessantly until the moonlight shimmered in the creek. She whispered that she made something for me. She said it was like a lucky charm, that it would protect me as long as I kept it on me and thought of her. It was a small crocheted doll, dressed as a pirate, with a fancy mustache made of what looked like tufts of my hair. I didn't question her. I just looked into her eyes, and she reassured me everything would be okay, kissing me on the cheek, before standing up with my hand in hers. She led me back to my place where she tried to give me my jacket back, but I said she should keep it and just give it back when I see her next, so she did. Our parents said their goodbyes, and we hugged each other one last time. I could see her sob as she waved goodbye through the rear windshield, and I cried too. It wasn't goodbye forever, but it felt like it. I gave the charm to my mom that night and told her it would protect her. All she needed to do was think of me. The next morning was too quiet. It was a dull, overcast day with a seemingly permanent fog that painted my room in a brackish hue. I shuffled myself towards the kitchen to make food, but noticed my dad softly crying in the living room. I changed course for the living room, turning the corner where I could now see he was crying into bloody hands. Without a second thought, I sprinted to Mom's room, throwing the door open to see her laying peacefully in her bed. I thought I saw someone peeping in through her window from the corner of my eye, so it took me a second to notice Mom's bleeding eyes, bloodied lips, and all the viscera pooling around her head, soaking into the pillow and sheets. At first, I shook her softly, then violently as she continued to not respond. I grabbed the clasped hands sitting on her chest, holding them to my lips as I prayed to a god I didn't know. In her hands was the little pirate charm. I knew she was thinking of me when she died. I didn't get to see the girl for a long time. I kept the pirate on a keychain dangling from my rear-view mirror. At some point, I decided I wouldn't rely on luck, so now it was just a reminder of better days that were long behind me. After months of investigation and all the wasted trials, they couldn't prove my dad guilty. It didn't feel like a win because he was already broken. He lost his jobs almost immediately, having to go on government assistance to keep the lights on. I worked 2 jobs under the table and helped my dad as best as I could during his prosecution. I didn't think he killed Mom like everyone else. The cause of death was bizarre for her condition and under most circumstances wouldn't occur naturally. Luckily for us, that wasn't strong enough evidence to convince a jury, especially after they saw the state Dad was in. I would catch him sleepwalking every night, and he was always standing in front of the fridge when I found him. I'd wake him up, and he'd tell me he dreamt of Mom, showing him every new drawing she hung on the fridge, before being swept away by water and pulled into the deep sea. Miraculously, I was able to graduate high school, even while working 2 jobs and making sure my dad remembered to eat food between his bouts of night terrors. A week into college, I came home to find a delivery driver attempting to drop off 3 brand new refrigerators, which I sent back. I asked my dad about it, but he got angry with me for the first time in years, rambling about how Mom would be upset if she doesn't have places to hang my pictures. I stopped drawing when Mom died, but somehow, Dad found piles of old drawings that younger me considered not good enough for the fridge. I was more focused on school now and ended up reconnecting with the Princess of the Creek. She said she noticed the pirate in my windshield and wanted to see me again. We go to the same college, so she waited by my car until I was done class to surprise me. We talked for hours at a coffee shop, catching each other up on our lives. Hers was perfect in comparison, so I spared her the dirty details of mine. I didn't want to kill the mood when we're talking like we were never apart. Somehow, I do remember her name all of a sudden. It was a whisper of a sound, softly billowing in my ear. A name I couldn't disrespect by butchering it with my dreamer's tongue. I lost track of time, kissing the princess goodbye before taking off back home. While I was gone, Dad had managed to get another delivery of refrigerators set up in the kitchen, with nowhere for them to be plugged in. He had already completely filled one fridge with my art and was starting on the second when I caught him. He was mumbling about how Mom will be so happy to see this when she's back from work. I fell to my knees, quietly sobbing as I watched my dad go through 4 rolls of Scotch tape to cover the rest of the fridges. We both slept on the kitchen floor that night. The morning comes fast, and I'm back to my regularly scheduled programming. I struggled to move the fridges to the unused dining room and made breakfast for both of us. While cleaning up, I noticed even more drawings that I swore weren't there last night. Most were incoherent doodles or just entire pages of black scribbles. I bundled them together and threw them in the garbage while my dad was distracted with his food. After showering myself and getting Dad comfy in the living room with his favorite show and snacks, I left for class. When I got home, every inch of the walls and ceiling were covered with the pages I had thrown out that morning. Even the windows were plastered with them, creating varying black and white collages of abstract figures and symbols. Dad was laying face up in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded in a puddle of his own urine. He was repeating lines from the Bible under his breath, looking up at a collage of hundreds of eyeballs that he taped to the ceiling. He wouldn't say anything to me other than Bible verses and calling out Mom's name. He did seem to hear me, but was incapable of responding or moving a muscle unless instructed to, and even then you had to guide him with a gentle push in the right direction. For weeks after, my girlfriend would come over to help me with Dad, and it took a lot of stress off of me. She was adamant on not letting me do this alone, so I couldn't stop her even if I tried. She would sleep over most nights, and even her parents came to see my dad. We hoped it might jog his memory to reconnect with old friends, but all it did was make him cry out for Mom more than he already was. I read somewhere that cats can be great therapy animals, So when a pregnant stray kept scratching at our back door for the scraps of food my girlfriend had been sneaking her, I suggested we just adopt her. She gave birth to the cutest litter kittens I'd ever seen, and Mama Cat really seemed to take a liking to my dad. She would sit in his lap and purr endlessly when she wasn't in mom mode. When they got big enough, we showed the babies to my dad, and for the first time in a long time, his eyes lit up. He even leaned over to give Mama Cat a kiss on the top of her head and said how proud he was of her. It was a beautiful but fleeting moment of clarity for him. Later on that night, we were startled awake to what sounded like a generator being run downstairs, quickly followed by several distinct shots of what I knew to be my dad's framing nailer. We looked at each other panicked and bolted downstairs towards the kitchen. My girlfriend screamed as she noticed the splattering of blood on the bottom step. Standing awkwardly in the kitchen next to an air compressor, framing nailer in hand, was my dad. He was admiring a fridge he managed to drag in from the garage, which he had nailed the baby kittens to, miscellaneous pieces of Mama Cat included. He turned to us with a genuine smile on his face and said as calm as the creek, "Ran out of tape, kiddo. Sorry if I woke you. Mom's gonna be so happy when she sees what we made for her." I'm 25 now. We have a son of our own who's turning 3 this autumn. He only got to see Dad a couple of times before he took his own life by gouging out his eyes in the hospital. At least that's what they told me. Doctors said something along the lines of, he couldn't stomach the guilt of his sins any longer, or some bullshit I didn't care to remember. Now I'm just focusing on my career, my writing, my princess-turned-queen who gave me the prince of my dreams, a legacy we can nurture together with our love. Something I couldn't have. Something he deserves. I even started carrying the pirate charm again. Something I used to think was just silly kid stuff now meant more to me than I could have imagined. I secretly learned to crochet, and even some other neat tricks to surprise my wife with a matching princess for her pirate, complete with real hair that I snuck off the floor from when she butchered her haircut last week. She loved it, carrying it everywhere she went. For the most part, life finally settled down. A bright future was starting. Last night, my wife found me sleepwalking again. The only thing I remember is dreaming of crashing waves, pulling me further into the deep as thousands of eyes stare back up at me. When she woke me up, I was standing in front of the fridge. 2. My grandpa met a strange man. The wind was full of humidity as I tore down the Indiana gravel road in my 2003 Chevy Impala. In my rearview mirror, thunderclouds gathered like artillery ready for battle, and the first flashes of lightning hit the ground at regular intervals. The cornfields rippled like waves. The sky's greenish hue made the world feel alien, and the dust cloud behind me made it seem like the ground itself was trying to escape the storm. I turned onto a small dirt driveway and parked in front of a white 2-story farmhouse. Shielding my eyes, I grabbed my duffel bag from the front seat and bounded up the 3 stairs, closing the whipping screen door behind me. My grandpa was seated in his chair in the living room watching Hogan's Heroes. His dinner plate sat next to him, remnants of tater tot casserole speckling it. He adjusted his 92-year-old frame to turn and see me, then stood at a snail's pace to offer a greeting. "Alice, how are you, my girl?" "I'm doing good, Grandpa. How are you?" "Oh, just dandy. You got so tall," he said, hunched shoulders raising to their limits to give me a hug. Thick, arthritic fingers patted my back, hands now more like claws than hands. My grandpa had been a farmer all his life. When none of his kids wanted to take the farm over, he just kept working, selling off land piece by piece to pay for his meager living. Even now, he still kept a garden with cabbage, peppers, onions, rhubarb, and a few tomato plants. 3 chickens gave him an egg for every morning's breakfast, and a neighbor brought him milk every week. He was a simple man. "How's school going for ya?" His voice was gruff, yet joyful. "I'm all graduated now." "Really?" "Yep, got a job and everything." "That's wonderful." "Where at?" "It's in Washington State. That's where I'm headed now, if you can believe it." "Really?" "That's a long drive." "Well, that's why I'm staying with you. Break it up a little bit. I'm visiting national parks and staying with friends, too." "Oh, wow. That sounds super. Well, if you need anything to eat, I've got tater tot casserole on the stove. I helped myself to a plate and sat on a lightly dusted sofa across from my grandpa. I told him all about school, and he told me about life in town. The bakery he went to every morning for the same burnt coffee had changed ownership, and now the rolls he brought home for Saturday lunch were sourdough, which he liked. His coffee group was now significantly smaller, as at least 3 of them had died, and 2 had moved into assisted living. It was a whirlwind of names I didn't know, yet somehow my grandpa recounting their life stories made it feel like they were old friends of mine too. Conversation grew sparse after an hour, and Grandpa was getting tired. The wind outside the house eventually triumphed over the TV as the primary background noise. The storm clouds churned as the front got closer to the house. As the wind gusted, it swayed and bounced the old power lines running to the house and barn. It made a strange, twanging sound, reverberating in the turbulent air. My grandpa perked up at the sound. The lines in his face shifted as he turned to the window enough to see the trees whipping around them. "He's on the lines." His usual content tone melted away. "What was that, Grandpa?" He turned to me with a tired face that looked older than ever. With a thoughtful ponderance I had never associated with him when I was a child, he told me the strangest story I've ever heard. "When I got back from the war, I bought this house, and your grandmother and I had our own little slice of paradise, it felt like, before kids came along. Not that that wasn't paradise too. Just a little noisier. Well, with my pension, I had a mind to buy me a tractor, and so I did. It was a beauty of a thing. Minneapolis Moline, white with yellow stripes, 37 horsepower. Got it secondhand, but it served me real well. Our neighbor Frank had an older one that went caput, and he just used it for parts. Said I could use anything from it if I needed. I was out in the field, planting in May, when a hose on the back broke. I knew Frank had the part, and I was fairly close to his farm, so I decided to walk on up the gravel road to get there. "Did you come from town or from the highway?" "Town," I said. "Okay, if you came from the highway, you'd have passed it. I was making my way back to the tractor, with the hose, when I walked up over a slight hill and saw a man walking toward me on the gravel road. He sure was peculiar looking. Even though the summer heat had just started, he was wearing a black suit and a bow tie. His shoes were covered in dust, but I could tell they had been shined recently. At first, I thought he might have been some traveling preacher or something, but he didn't carry no Bible nor a suitcase. Instead, he was dragging this steel T-post of sorts. It was like 2 sections of 4-inch pipe, one welded to the middle of the other one. I thought it might have been a tractor component of some sort, though I've never seen anything like it. When I finally got close enough to say good afternoon, I could see he had this greasy, jet black hair, done up with pomade so not one strand was out of place. When I called out to him, he gave me a smile with teeth as white as a sheet, and his eyes were something deep brown. In the afternoon sun, his face didn't have no sweat on it. Real strange. He called back to me in a sort of sing-songy way. "Good afternoon, mister." He sounded like he had a voice for a pulpit, full but not too deep and booming. "What are you up to, sir?" I said back. We were now a few paces away. The sound of gravel grating against that pipe had stopped by that point, which I was glad for. He said, "I'm just a walkin' the road, mister." Looking for something or someone. "What you looking for?" I said. "You lost?" No, not lost, he said, just wandering while I wander. So I asked, "You a preacher?" He kept smiling at me, so I figured maybe he had some holy disposition, but he shook his head and said, "No, not by profession, but perhaps related to it." Now he was looking over at the power lines. They were running along 100 foot between posts, set horizontal across the top bar, and there was the landline too. So I asked him, "You a lineman?" "No," he said, still grinning. I kinda half. Laughed at the thought of a strangely dressed fellow wandering around not knowing what he was looking for. "Then what you doing out here?" I asked him. He turned to me and raised an eyebrow. "I'm looking for a name." Something in his tone made me tense up a little bit, so I just asked him, "Like, looking for somebody? Wanting to know who lives around here?" But he just went on like he didn't know what I was saying. "Oh, perhaps," he said. "I'm just in need of a name." And with that, he hoisted up that T-post and planted it in the loose gravel at his feet. Somehow it stayed upright. The top bar sat a little above our heads, and in a quick step he jumped up so he was hanging on it, back to the post, arms wrapped around each side of the top bar. He crossed his legs and hung there, grinning at me. That trick was strange. Something about him looking down at me didn't feel right. So I asked him, "Where'd you learn a trick like that?" He hopped down, but that T-post stayed put. When you have time to wait, you have time to balance. He gave a little half bow and looked at me like I was supposed to clap or something. Then he asked me, "You been in the army, mister?" I said I had, and he asked me where. I told him about the Pacific, and his eyes sort of lit up at every detail I was giving him. After a bit, I got feeling so strange, I just stopped in the middle of a sentence. He kept looking at me. Then he asked, "Did you find your service worthwhile?" Seemed like kind of a strange question, but I said, "Well, I say it's what I had to do." He started parroting me, going, yes, what I had to do." So I asked, "You ever been in the service?" He perked up again, wouldn't give me a straight answer. "In a sort of way, yes. The service has treated me mighty fine." He knocked on the T-post, caught it as it started to tip over, and then set it back up. Then he kept talking. "I'm looking for a name. You got one for me?" His smile was making me uncomfortable. I watched him pull himself up to the top of the T-post and sit there on the middle of it. I was waiting for him to tip over, but then he hoisted himself up to his feet, and by Jove, he was walking along the top beam like some kind of tightrope. So I said, "You from the circus?" He looked at me, standing on that beam, smiling like a loon, and said, "You might call it a bit of a circus. Maybe as chaotic as one." He jumped down and landed like a cat. It was then that I realized how late in the day it was getting, and that the sun had been swallowed up by some clouds on the western horizon. They were big old storm clouds, and it sure looked like rain. So I said that it looks like rain, and that I might be needing to go. His eyebrows shot up at that, and I got scared he might follow me. Didn't know how I'd get away, considering the tractor was busted, and it was almost a straight shot back to the house. I didn't want to try and outrun him, neither. So I just figured I'd keep talking until he decided to leave. "You afraid of getting caught in the storm?" I said. "No, I love a good storm," he said, looking at the clouds. Then he turned to me and said, "You got a wife?" That grin was as big as ever. Thankfully, I had turned to look at the clouds, and my face couldn't betray me to him. It was like his gaze was boring into the side of my head. I could feel it pressing up against me, sure as he was standing there. I managed to croak out a no. Then he asked me one more time. He made me look at him in the eyes, like I was under compulsion or something. He looked in my eyes and he said, "I'm looking for a name. You got one for me?" That grin was still there, and I was waiting for it to twist, for him to leap on me and drop that post on my head. But it stayed steady, and I felt like I forgot how to speak. I couldn't tell if he was asking for my name, or for me to give him one, or to tell him someone else's name, but I didn't like the thought of what might happen if I told him one. I felt like he knew my name just by looking at me. So I swallowed a lump in my throat, shook my head, and croaked out another no. He held my gaze for a bit longer, and then he started laughing. Just chuckling at first, kind of a hearty sound, but then it escalated, and he was all over his register, high and low, cackling like a loon. He picked up his T-post and slung it on his shoulder. I was scared he might swing it at me, so I took a few steps back. He didn't move toward me, to my relief. He turned towards the power lines and jumped, like he had springs in his shoes, some 30 foot in the air, and that T-post became light as air. The wind started to pick up, and he almost floated down between the power lines, some 20 foot in the air, and he caught one power line on one side of the T-post and 2 lines on the other side. And it sparked something awful, and he just laughed louder. All the time, laughing. And those wires, they didn't bend like normal wires. They stretched like rubber bands as his weight settled on them. Then, following the lines, they launched him up and over the nearest telephone pole onto the next stretch of wires, almost floating, like gravity didn't remember him, all the while cackling and hooting like it was the most fun he'd ever had. I watched him swing off into the distance, dark suit against that darkening sky. After a minute, I lost sight of him, but that telephone line was still twanging like a guitar string. The wind picked up, and the sky was turning green, and I felt this overwhelming sense of fear since I couldn't see him anymore. Only other time I felt like that was not being able to see the enemy in the war. So I turned and started running. Left the tractor in the field. That storm chased me all the way home, and that twanging of the wires. It almost sounded like laughter. I got home. My feet were bleeding in my boots, and Doreen thought I was sick or something from how pale I was. She asked why I'd left the tractor, and I just said it broke down. I didn't say anything about the man. Seemed like he might know if I told her. Weighed heavy on my mind. The one thing I never told her before she died. He stopped and sat for a while, just staring out the window at that turbulent sky. You know, your sister inherited your grandma's looks, but I think you inherited your grandma's spirit. Thank you for coming to visit me. Of course, Grandpa, I said, a little confused. Want a piece of peach pie? I got a little ice cream in the freezer. He seemed to shake himself out of the funk pretty quick. We had some pie, and I retired to the spare room upstairs. The storm made it hard to sleep. I tossed and turned as rain battered the window, and thunder boomed and shook the house. It sounded like a war outside. The next morning, I had a drowsy cup of burnt coffee and an egg and bacon with my grandpa before I gave him a hug, climbed into my car, and shuttled off down the gravel road. Grandpa seemed back to his usual self as he waved goodbye from the front porch, but maybe the lines in his face hid the fatigue in his eyes. As my car zoomed over sluggish gravel roads now wet from the rain, I thought about the story. I looked to the side of the road, half expecting to see evidence of a strange man dragging a metal T-post. Maybe some of the indents in the new mud were footprints. I finished my road trip with all the normal and happy memories I had hoped for. This one, though, stuck out in the bunch of them. And I haven't been able to forget it easily. Yesterday, I got a phone call that my grandpa passed. He was sitting in his chair in the living room. We had a big storm come through in Washington last night, and it made me feel like I should share this with somebody. Thank you for watching Nightmare Proof. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the nightmares alive. Have a story of your own? Send it in and you may hear it here next time. Until then, sleep well if you can.